All right, Dave, we are back. I normally put your picture on here, but I wanted to have that awkward moment while we sit and watch that timer go.
Hey, no worries, no worries.
It's always fun as we get started. We hit record and we sit and look at the screen as we're waiting for it to connect. But, Dave, welcome to our show today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's always fun talking retirement, especially with somebody that just has the vast knowledge of retirement that you do. Dave, how do you do it all?
It's very interesting when you look at the amount of information I do cover, but I found that as I spend my time in it and you teach it consistently, that stuff stays there. And that's been something that's been good for me. Now, there are things that I don't know a lot about today. Someone from a foreign country reached out to me in regards to a product that, no, I'm not familiar with it. It's primarily done in China. But all in all, with most American topics, it seems like we can cover a broad range of those.
Dave, is there a particular area that you love talking about most?
There are a couple of them that I really enjoy, and they're ones that a lot of advisors don't like talking about. One of them, obviously, is just the risks facing retirement, which is really what we do. It's trying to address the risks. But I do enjoy Social Security and Medicare, two topics that a lot of people shy away from because they're so complex. But what I find is that those are products that affect everyone. If I go through a risk webinar and I talk to people, it's going to affect maybe 20, 30% of the attendees, maybe 50, whatever the case may be. But Social Security and Medicare, we all need it. So we all need to understand it, no matter if you're rich or poor, or wherever you're at. So I do like those topics because it does really resonate with the masses.
Well, Dave, luckily I did pull a question that we will be talking about some of that today, and
Good,
we will be getting to that soon. So don't worry.
good.
All right. So we want to welcome everyone that's joining us live and those on replay. Thank you for being here. We just love having you here. We love your live questions. So if you have questions, anything in retirement, go ahead and put those in the chat and we'll go ahead and bring those to Dave. The way this format works is we have a list of questions that come in and we curate those and get them all set up so we could do each of these live shows each week. Dave, I mean, are you able to say you've probably answered over 10,000 questions probably so far?
Yes, for sure, and it's growing. It's got to probably even getting up closer to 12,000 at this point. But we go through a ton of questions on a weekly basis. Unbelievable what we've been exposed to. But on the flip side, there are times people ask questions that we're not as familiar with, or maybe I've not been exposed to, that allow us, and especially me, to go and do some research and learn about some topics that maybe I wasn't as clear on in the past.
And we love your backgrounds, your stories, all the different things that you share, Dave, because I think that really helps us to understand about who you are, but also about why you do this, why you come and talk about retirement and try to help educate people.
Absolutely. And you will be happy to know, CR, we just had Valentine's Day and I am still married. I did not take the advice of the radio and go out and buy lottery tickets for my wife. I ended up doing some other things. So be happy to know that I am still married, that I don't always take the advice that's out there being provided by other people.
So tell me about this, Dave, because I don't know if everyone has heard the story, but you were going to buy your wife lottery tickets for Valentine's?
Well, when I was on the way home after dropping my son off from school, there was an ad on the radio for the Tennessee Lottery, and they run a lot of ads. If you live in Tennessee, you understand that. But they were running this ad that was the thing your sweetheart wanted. That was going to take your relationship to the next level if you were to go out and buy these Tennessee Lottery tickets. Again, I'm not quite sure what the chances of winning, what that's like when all of a sudden they've scratched off, or however that works, scratched everything off, and they're sitting here going, I've got a pile of worthless paper. But I did not take that advice. I got flowers. One of the other things I did do, went out and bought my wife a new ring. She had ended up losing her wedding ring about a year ago, and I went out and bought her a new ring for this Valentine. So things seem to be going good right now.
Well, Dave, I'm so glad to hear that because I don't know if you would have shown up with lottery tickets, how that would have gone. So I'm excited to hear. I'm just be curious how many people actually followed through and did that.
Yeah, I'd love to see the backstory. I would, honestly, to be able to go into a situation where some guy's gone out and gone down to the convenience store. It's like, I'll pass on the flowers this year. I'm getting lottery tickets. Yeah, that might be an interesting situation there.
Well, Dave, as always, we have Gary Wong joining us. He's out of San Francisco, and good morning to you, Gary.
Good morning, Gary. Glad to have you with us again.
So great to have you. So, Dave, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the questions again. As always, I have questions that we have that we're going to throw out to you, and we're also looking forward to your questions that are coming from you that are with us live today. Dave, let me get to my first one here. So this is from Kevin. He's a CPA and he wants to know which product or service is best to reduce longevity risk.
There's a couple of things out there that really work with this. The first one is Social Security, something everyone's going to be able to get. It is a lifetime payment and inflation adjusted, something that you're not getting on many other investments that you have out there. So that's number one. And if you're trying to get the most out of it, make sure you understand what period of time you should claim, whether it's 62, full retirement age 70, somewhere in between there. That's number one. The next one, you're really going to need to look at annuities. What we find is they are the products that we need to have. And we're seeing top economists, top doctors, people with doctorate degrees saying your retirement's never going to look as good if you don't put these in there, because they're going to allow you to get income throughout your retirement. And retirement's all about income. Really doesn't matter how many assets I have. I need to have that monthly income to cover those expenses that are going to keep coming until I pass away.
Dave, we do work with a lot of CPAs. In fact, that's a majority of who the people we work with are. But as we look at this, Dave, what's some other advice we can give? Because if we're looking at just how to reduce longevity risk, I'm sure there's a lot of other questions that need to be asked before we even get to this phase.
People have to start realizing that retirement's changing substantially. The fact that we're living much longer, that's changing. The risks that are out there in stock markets that we don't really even understand anymore. You start looking at the trends and the things that should have collapsed the market. It hasn't done that yet. We look at all this printing that's going on of the money that's now hopefully coming to an end, but it's created a different market for all of us. So one, we've got to really assess what's out there, what are the opportunities for us, and then sit down with someone who understands what's going on and put a plan together. Take your information with the knowledge that's available and the software that's out there, which is a critical part of retirement planning, put all that together and then come up with a plan that's really a working plan, CR. That's the other thing. We're not just saying, look, you put it in there and you forget about it and you just try to follow what's going on. You want to be able to keep looking at it as things adjust. Hey, maybe I change my conversions to a Roth. Hey, things adjust. Maybe I start taking money out of this account instead of the one I'd planned on doing, whatever that case may be.
Dave, I love that you say a working plan. I feel like a lot of us put a plan in place and then it just sits there. It's like you get it, put it in a folder and you put it on the bookcase and then you don't touch it again until you need it.
And you're right. And there's parts of it that I will tell you, part of the great thing of having a plan, there are parts that you are going to have to do a lot with. They're structured in a way when we look at the overall planning, and especially if you're looking at products such as annuity or insurance products that are going to be set in there for decades, maybe the way that they're going to operate. But it doesn't mean you don't still look at it. I mean, like you say, there's still opportunities that you've got to look at what indexes maybe you're invested in. When do I start taking money off of this product? What has the market done to these other things? And that's going to take some time each year to be able to look at it, maybe even more frequently than that, to look at it and say, hey, am I in good shape? Yeah, you know what? I'm great. Don't worry about it. No, I'm not. I need to make some small adjustments.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things we also need to talk about, Dave, is making sure we get the right education, because as we get more education, we're able to make better decisions. And in fact, Dave, I've got Gary who's bugging you. Would you be willing to develop a webinar on Roth solo case purchasing real estate?
It's going to be a while before I do that. I'm willing to consider it. The challenge is because there's so few people it's going to apply to. It's a topic that's going to be interesting. It's a lot like some of the other topics I talk about. I already talk about self-directed plans, but it's going to have a small audience. So we've got, I think, 4 or 5 webinars, CR, already slotted that are going out here over the next 3 or 4 months. We're looking at doing a large event in November. We're hoping that happens this year, where we'd bring a lot of other educators in to bring topics. But yeah, I'll look into it. Maybe when we get to our event, maybe it's an opportunity that we have to be able to get another advisor to be able to educate on that. Or one thing I will do, Gary, we will put it on our list for our podcast. That's something that I could do easier, put it out there on a podcast. It's going to be 15, 20 minutes versus putting a whole webinar together with slide decks and everything else that go with it.
And you can catch that podcast. It's the Retirement Risk Show. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. And so, Gary, we'll make it a point and I'll get that on the list there and we'll get it over to our team. But definitely great advice. So Dave, as we're just talking about education, why is it so critical that depending on if we're CPA talking to our clients or if it's just for ourselves, Why do we need so much education in retirement?
Because things change a lot from what we perceive them to be, and not necessarily that they've even changed over the last 5 or 6 years. We may have situations where something changed 5, even 10 years ago, but we had a perception 20 years ago on what it looked like. That same, especially when we look at insurance products, people looked at some of the old insurance products that were horrible. I don't blame people for not buying them, but the way they operate has changed. We look at Social Security, there hasn't been a real adjustment there since 2015. But prior to that, people had these perceptions that with those 2015 changes, they didn't realize even that happened. So it's really getting to a point that we understand what's the current laws? What does that look like for me? What does longevity now do for me versus if I have that old paradigm thinking, I'm only making till 70. That's it. I'm done. Well, you know what? You may live to 80, 90, 100.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, Dave, as we get into our next question here, this is from Dana Sue. Would it be too late to now purchase a long-term care insurance policy? And if I remember from the question that was submitted, that she is still in pretty good health.
Yeah, only if, and you just brought that up, only if you've got a situation where you're uninsurable, meaning that you've got a bad neck, bad back, maybe a family history of mental illness. There are no pre-existing condition rules when it comes to long-term care. So if you do have issues, they can deny you, but you can get these policies clear up until 85. See, I was a little shocked. I had someone that wanted one of these. They were 87. And I thought, there's no way in the world. And we went back to our back office and they said, yeah, 85 is the cutoff. Now, I will tell you, if you're waiting till that point, and even for you at age 65, going to be far more expensive than what it would have been if that were purchased in your 30s or 40s.
Dave, do we really need long-term care insurance?
Absolutely. It's the biggest risk that we have from a numerical standpoint that you're going to face in retirement. 35% of us that aren't even in retirement. Once you get to average life expectancy, it goes up to 70%, but 35% that we're going to become permanently disabled. Hard to believe. 1 in 3. So if we take you, I, and Gary, I see him on here, chance is one of us is going to have a long-term care event where we'll be permanently disabled and we're going to need someone else to take care of us for a period of anywhere from probably 2 to 6 years, depending on how long that goes.
And Dave, I know on one of your recent webinars, you were talking about how a lot of people during the pandemic brought people into their home. So they said, okay, this is mom and dad, I'm going to bring them home. But is that trend going to continue that way?
No, because we're not built on the traditional family structure that we had in the past. When we look back to prior generations, what you had, especially from a child standpoint, and my family itself's been structured that way, you had primarily one person that was going out earning the income, the other one that was staying home doing all the work, taking care of the kids. And so if a long-term care event happened, they were in a better position to be able to take care of aging mom or dad. Well, when we look at it now, yes, people brought them home. One, because maybe they didn't have work anymore because of the pandemic. Number two, they were tired of seeing everyone pass away in the nursing homes, but that's not going to last. People are going to have to go back to work. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to handle their finances, and that's going to make things change. But I do want to make one comment. I mentioned between you, I, and Gary, one of us is in the long-term care situation. I'm voting it's not me. So you and Gary can work out the other part of that. But what, I'm putting it in right now, I don't want to be the guy.
All right, Gary, you and I are going to have to do rock, paper, scissors later. Well, I definitely appreciate that, Dave. And that's just the one thing as we talk about that with longevity. A lot of times you even brought it up. Hey, I'm going to be done at 70, but you're like, wait a minute, you may have a lot longer to go and you just don't realize it. Those are things we have to look at, because as we're looking at all the different risks putting on the table, you're saying there's a lot more than just one item to kind of look into.
The majority of people are going to underestimate their life expectancy. And it's really hard to believe sometimes because we don't generally hang out with a bunch of old people. That's just not the way it is unless you work in a nursing home or you're in a situation. Again, these people aren't getting out. You're not seeing all these people hanging out at the grocery store, the ball game, all these other things. When we look at it and say average life expectancy, if you made it 65 now, it's about 84 for a male, 88 for a female, a lot longer than what we see in the general public. Again, I go to the ball game, like, okay, there's a couple of 80-year-olds maybe there, a lot of, a few 70-year-olds, a lot of 60, 30, 40, whatever the age is. We oftentimes forget how many people are still alive we're not seeing. And someday we're going to become one of those. We're going to be one of these people that isn't getting out that much. We're in those no-go years where we're not doing a whole lot, but we're still alive.
Definitely. Well, Dave, I've got a couple questions coming in here from Facebook, so I'm going to switch gears and jump over to our live questions coming in from Facebook. So, Dave, here's our first one from Rick. Could you expand on how an annuity could be beneficial? Assume I have $750,000 in liquid assets and 750,000 in a traditional 401k and 750,000 in rental property.
Yeah, when we look at it, be aware there are multiple types of annuities. So you've got anywhere from a variable annuity, which is tied to the market, not the ones I recommend. Now, I'm not saying you can't have those. The biggest reason on my end, they are tied to the market. So you've got the downside risk. Sometimes they can have higher fees. You've also got a fixed annuity, which oftentimes isn't going to produce the income that you need to keep up with inflation. And then you've got indexed annuities. And the benefit of those is you've got a floor, meaning if the market drops 30%, you're not going to lose your money during the accumulation phase. And then you've got the ceiling, whatever it is, on a growth side. And last year we had some that did over 20%. But the benefit is getting it into the annuitization phase for most people of saying, look, Social Security is only intended to cover between 20 to 40% of my income during my retirement years. I got to have something else. And if retirement's all about income, how do I get guaranteed income for the rest of my life? That's the annuity, where you're taking those assets and turning them into a stream of income. Now, Rick, there's multiple ways you can do this. There are growth annuities where you say, look, I'm going to put money in here, get the benefits of not having the market collapse on me, and I'm never going to take the money out. Or there's the income annuities where you're saying, look, I'm going to turn these into income. My recommendation for most people now is, hey, buy multiple annuities. Don't just take, like if you had 750,000, I'm not saying you should even put that much in. There's a calculation to figure out what you put in there. Generally, at your age is a percentage of 100 that goes into principal protected products. But I'd look at saying, hey, maybe I buy, if I'm going to buy $500,000 of annuity, I buy 5 different annuities. That way I can turn them on when I need to. If you get into retirement, say, hey, early on, I need 2 of these annuities, and then I get to a position I need another one, I can just turn them on. If not, they're there. So hopefully that helps you. But as we look at them, great way to stabilize that income during our retirement years.
And Dave, I'm going to throw a little plug in. I was just looking over on my other screen here, is that you did a podcast with Tom Hagnon. You guys talked about annuities. In fact, the title is The Crossroads of Longevity and Volatility, How Annuities Help. So that actually comes out Friday. So be ready for that one as well. And plus, Dave, you have a lot of webinars that also kind of dive into the particular topics of annuities. Because I know, and Rick, I appreciate that question, because there's a lot of people out there that have been burned by annuities in the past. And you're saying, Dave, this is what we talked about, making sure we have a working plan, because we're not just doing what we did 20, 30 years ago. We're actually being involved with our plans and not just letting them sit there.
We have a new webinar that's been launched that's coming out, that how to protect your retirement assets in the next crash, when things fall down. And I talk a lot about annuities in there, and especially fixed indexed annuities, to help you better understand how they can be used for a portion of your portfolio to help you there. So yeah, a lot of tools out there to take advantage of. Tax-free income for life class, another one where we talk about Roth annuities and how they can be used effectively to get you guaranteed tax-free lifetime income that, if done correctly, could even be inflation adjusted. There's products out there that will increase your payment each year as the market goes up.
And Dave, we'll just do one more follow-up this before we get back in from Rick. And he said, do you use liquid assets or 401k funds to buy your annuities?
So generally what we want to do, if you can get access to those 401k funds, is generally what we're doing is, our goal is to get them tax-free. So what we would do, move those into an IRA. You're not going to be able to buy them currently inside of your 401k. There's very limited access to annuities there, and there are only income annuities. You can't get ones with some of the death benefits and other benefits that I like to see. But then what I would suggest is, if you can get those into an IRA, then start converting them, which you can do over time. You don't have to take the whole amount. Now, if you got multiple annuities, you could do each of them in a given year, but then get those into the Roth account. So now not only do you have that guaranteed lifetime income if you annuitize that product, but now it's tax-free. You're not having to worry about it. Where if you did use liquid assets, you can do that. The problem is you would obviously end up paying tax on the growth as you started taking distributions out of that at some point in the future.
And thank you so much, Rick, for that question and that follow-up. So I hope that really helps there. Dave, let's jump over to our next one here from Gary. Let's see if we can dive into this one for a moment. Can you explain the tax and penalty consequences of my millennial daughter, Melissa, personally repairing property owned by her Roth Solo K plan trust? a prohibited transaction?
Yeah, you've got to be very careful. And this is an area where when you have real estate in these funds, when you have them in your retirement, is you're a prohibited individual in the way that you interact with this product, again, this account. And I don't know, Gary, I've not looked into details on the solo 401k, but I know it's a very big issue because individually she would be someone that's prohibited. And with these properties, again, you never know when there's going to be a problem. So you have this situation where it's like, I can't go get a third party loan because I can't have secured property, but yet money's got to go in there. How in the world can I do it if it's exceeded my contribution amount? So Gary, unfortunately, I'm not sure what that's going to look like on that situation for her.
Well, Dave, we'll continue to look into that one. And again, Gary and Rick, thank you so much for those questions. Dave, let's jump back over to the questions we have here. I've got a few of these I wanted to get to. Let's get back over to Ellis. My business partner and I of 23 years would like to offer our employees retirement options other than 401ks. What else can we offer?
Yeah, one of the things that you might want to look at is a simple IRA. This is where putting up a plan, they're not going to be able to contribute as much into these. Your commitment may not be as large for you to have an employer contribution into it, but the fees are going to be less as well. They're going to be set up to where it's going to be less fee, less contribution, and less cost. Well, if you're a small employer and you're wanting to provide a retirement plan, probably would be my best option next to the 401k. Now, personally, I will tell you, I'm a huge fan of 401ks. I like the fact that you can put so much money into them. I like the fact that you can set up a Roth account on top of them so you can get the money into the Roth. But I realize that it doesn't work for everyone. You've got to start somewhere.
And Dave, what if we are working somewhere where we only have the 401k option and there is no Roth option?
Well, hopefully you're in a position you can put money into your Roth IRA. Your income maybe isn't above the threshold where you can do that. The other option, you may be able to do a mega backdoor Roth contribution where you would put money into your traditional IRA or 401k account and then move that over into your Roth account. Now, if there's not one there, obviously it's going to be problematic because you've got to have a Roth account to move that money into. It's not like you can just put it back into the IRA. So definitely something to look at. If you don't have a Roth at work, I would encourage you to get your employer to change the rules of the plan. I mean, it's not that expensive, maybe $500 to $1,000, but can make a huge impact when we look at the future of tax rates on the benefits that they're able to provide for their employees.
Dave, I wanted to bring up this particular question that we got in, and because I feel like this one can be very controversial, so I wanted to talk about it because you brought this up actually on one of our recent webinars. Lauren, she's 61. She said, I recently separated from my husband. If we do not get divorced, will my Social Security benefits and Medicare enrollment be impacted? And Dave,
When you look at, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was going to start before I have you answer that. If you remember, some of these people are working on these different products and benefits because they're saying, I'm going to keep my marriage together or separate for the fact of just this. And so I wanted to bring that up before you dive into that.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people get caught up in the tax side of marriage. Now, that's definitely not what mine's built on. And sometimes I look at that like your lottery tickets for your Valentine's Day gift. If you're only using taxes to determine whether your marriage stays together or not sure that's the best option. Now, every marriage is different. And I know for some people it works. So not going to fully, give it a bad rap here. But when we look at it from Lauren's side, the Medicare benefit's not going to change. They're individual, really not going to affect anything. Social Security from a claiming and receiving benefit standpoint, not going to affect. But if they file separately for provisional income and the taxation of Social Security benefits, there's now no threshold, meaning that they would individually be having to pay up to 85% tax on all the Social Security benefits they're receiving without having the thresholds for the provisional income that would exclude that.
Now, Dave, there is more that I didn't get to put on here, but I really look at this and I wonder how many people out there are staying together because, like you said, of the tax purposes or because of things like this, because they just don't know. So they're saying, well, if we do get a divorce or if we don't, how do I handle my Social Security or my Medicare? And I think that's something that I don't know, but it really has troubled me since our last webinar where we talked about this.
Yeah, and when you look at it, even with some of the marriage penalties, usually they're not that big of dollars. In fact, I had someone years ago, he went through this process. He was bound and determined that he wasn't going to pay the government, anybody, more money than he had to. And so he went through the process, separating from his wife in his 80s or 90s. I mean, he was an old guy. And then he passed away. And guess what, CR? One of the other people he never wanted to pay was an attorney. So he never set up a trust or anything to protect his assets once he passed away. Well, guess who got all the money? The IRS and the attorneys, the two guys that had spent his whole life trying to keep from getting any of those funds. So again, got to look at it. Everyone's relationship's different, but the more we can keep them together, the more we can understand the importance of that. I think that the more success we have in all of our lives.
Dave, I wanted to bring this other question up, obviously, because it sounds like Kyle's made a wise choice to move to Georgia. That's where I'm just outside of Atlanta, so I had to bring this question in. My client wishes to retire at 70 and move to Georgia from Arizona. Very wise move. How will moving states their first year of retirement affect their taxable and tax deferred assets?
In their situation, probably not going to have that much of an impact. Now, I don't know what the tax rates are in Arizona, and I don't know what they are in Georgia, but my understanding, they're pretty close to each other. Again, maybe within a percentage or two of each other. So in this situation where Kyle's moving there, going to become your new neighbor, not really much of an impact. But if you had someone who's saying, look, I'm going to go from Arizona where I've had to pay tax into Florida or Nevada or one of these states, even Tennessee now, where there's no tax that's being imposed, maybe a situation where it's going to save them substantial amounts of money. And even on some of those tax deferred assets, maybe in a situation where they're going to avoid some tax. And that needs to come into planning as well. Because when we look at it, again, if you're looking at California at 13%, let's take someone like Gary saying, look, if I'm in the top bracket, I'm upwards to 13%, but I'm going to retire in Nevada. If you're doing conversions, if you're doing planning, things that are happening, it looks a lot different. If all of a sudden you're saying, look, once I get into retirement, I take 13% tax off the table. Well, that all plays into the calculations we should be putting together.
And Dave, one thing I also wanted to bring up is when we talk about moving in retirement or close to retirement, isn't there other things we need to look at as well? Because obviously, if we're looking at this, we may have some impact if we're getting into our health benefits as well.
Absolutely. There's a ton of things we need to look at from just family standpoint. Is all of your family in Arizona and now you're going to be separated from them? And for some people, that's fine. Others, it's like, man, this is going to be tough. Your social groups that you've been a part of, if you've been part of the bowling league, or maybe you're out playing pickleball on a daily basis. If you're an outgoing person, hey, maybe you get to Georgia and you start running with CR or doing other things that he's doing there in Georgia. But we also do have to look at it from a health side. Someone that's 70 years old, they're in theory would be on Medicare. If they're on a Medicare Advantage plan, they can switch, but the plan that they currently had in Arizona is not going to work for them probably in Georgia unless they're with one of the huge companies that does go mostly nationwide now. You're going to have some transitions and what you're doing. So definitely a lot of things you've got to consider. Also got to look at the cost of living. What is the cost of living there? Is it going to cost me more because of what's available than what I've been paying? Is it going to cost me less? All these things need to be taken into consideration.
And Dave, I know we have some more comments coming in live. We may have to have you get to in the chat there because I promised Gladys we'd get to her final question here before we ended here. She said, my husband and I turned 64 this year, and we would like to have more than what Part A and Part B of Medicare offer. Where do we begin, and can we get a policy together?
Gladys, absolutely great questions. And when we look at it, know that those of you that are listening, Part A and B are traditional Medicare. Part A is your hospitalization coverage. Part B is your typical health insurance. Part C and D are provided by third parties. Part C is Medicare Advantage plans. Part D is your prescription drug coverage, which the government's kicked out into Part D, not part of your Part A or B benefit. So as you look at this, what you have is insurance that's got a lot of gaps in it, anywhere from your prescription drugs to there's co-pays, co-insurance, all types of other things that happen in Part A and B. I like that they're getting started early. I recommend this for anyone because the program is far more complex than you think it is. And you want to be able to get signed up for whatever benefits you're getting 3 months before your 65th birthday. But what they need to look into is Medicare Advantage plans, the Part C, as well as Medigap or Medicare supplement plans. Same product, two different terms, to figure out what's going to be best for them, what they can afford. because when you look at it, the policies are going to cost different, but they really need to figure out how they're going to cover those gaps and how much money they have to cover those gaps.
And Dave, is this something that they can do? So for Gladys and her husband together, that this is something that they can, I mean, again, I'm thinking about this whole relationship thing here. It's still on my mind of making sure they can really do this as a team.
Yeah, my recommendation is that you get a broker involved if you're going to do this. Let them guide you. Now, you can go to Medicare.gov, type in your zip code. It's going to pull up, if you got an account there, it's going to pull up all the various products that are out there that you can see what's available. So you can make your choice, and there will be different prices. There's going to be different coverage with these products. But if you get a broker involved, not only can they help you with the initial decision, but they help you on the back end. And let me tell you, I've had a miserable experience with my insurance. Now, too long of a story to get into fully, but I ended up having a transplant in Puerto Rico. I had primary insurance through my company, and then I end up on Medicare, which you do if you have end-stage renal failure. Well, my insurance company is supposed to be primary insured still. Guess what? They kept sending notices saying Medicare is primary insured. We're not paying. It became an absolute nightmare. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have a great broker in Puerto Rico that helped me solve these issues. So I got stuck paying out of pocket. But this stuff can happen. You can have issues. Even now, I'm on a Medicare Advantage plan now because I'm no longer in Puerto Rico. And I'm having the same issue. They're saying, wait, your old insurance should be the one covering it. Well, if you've got a broker, now they can step in and facilitate all the paperwork. And there can be a lot of it if you have health issues that you need help with, and it's not costing you anything. You're allowing them to get paid from the insurance companies, and they're providing services that can make your life much easier.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for spending this half hour with us, answering all of these questions. I know we're definitely over time, and there's a few questions we didn't get to, even coming in live. So we'll see if we can get those in the chat. And again, I appreciate all of those questions that came in. And if you have additional questions, you can always submit those at retirementriskadvisors.com and go to the contact us page, and you go ahead and submit your question in there. So that way we can continue to get these added on to our other shows. Dave, any final words? I mean, I know we're over time, but I'm hoping something we can squeeze in here.
Yes, I do. No lottery tickets for your loved one for Valentine's, birthday, or holidays. There are better options out there if you're trying to stay married to keep that marriage intact.
Well, I'm so glad I did not hear that advice before, because, maybe I could have bought some lottery tickets and been on the couch for a week. So, well, thank you, Dave. And again, everyone, thank you for being here live. And for those on replay, thank you again. And we hope to see you next week, as we always do this every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Central Time. And we'll see you guys again soon.
Bye.